This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. Well, behind the 75 million records sold with INXS, behind the stadium tours, the global hits, and the unmistakable sound was a songwriter, a composer, a producer, a musical architect. Today, we're stepping beyond the arena lights and into the next chapter. This is Andrew Farriss, Life After INXS. And Andrew, thank you for joining me on the show.
Yeah, how are you, Shane?
I'm fantastic, mate. Fantastic. Let's just jump right in and take us right back. What was the first moment that you realized that music wasn't just something that you enjoyed, but something that you needed to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always loved playing instruments, and songwriting for me started when I used to try and take apart my uncle's upright piano, a Beal piano from the 1950s. And he actually ended up giving me the piano, which I've had restored here. It's at home. I use it now after all those years. That was when I was 9 years old, I think. But I didn't even realize I was writing music. I just liked playing. And it was only later that I realized I was actually writing music. And I used to experiment with chords mostly, and always trying different ideas and ways of construction or whatever in musically. And I think lyrically, people, as they gain more experiences, probably write better lyrics as they get older, because you have more to talk about,
more life experience. Yeah,
that's right. And so I think the two of those kind of went hand in hand. But I think my music journey, I mean, I don't know when I really ever woke up and went, music's just the only thing in my life. There's always been a lot of things in my life besides obviously family and friends. Is that, I think I like sports when I was younger, I like playing sports, and, the community aspect of that. And, there was other things that went along in my life, plus the early, first job experiences and, meeting people. And as you do, there's sort of, the more you get out in the community, the more you experience things, the more you learn, really.
Yeah. It is all life experience. And I'm sure that you look back at some of your earlier songs and you think, what was I writing then? Where did that come from? When was the time that you wrote a song that you suddenly realized, I've actually got a career in this?
Well, I always looked at songwriting as and in many ways I still do, as a luxury. If you've got time to sit around writing songs, then obviously you can pay the rent or pay the mortgage or whatever it is you're trying to do as an adult. But I think it was also probably pressure, ironically, is that when you want to get your music heard and you want to get it out and on the radio or whatever and get coverage of what you're trying to do. And as a band member with INXS, I remember thinking, I better get my shit together and start to write songs that connect with people, so that when we put them out, that people like them. And I think that's something that Michael and I realized as we went along, and especially Michael lyrically, because he didn't really play an instrument. His instrument was his voice, and man, what a voice, but he was very adept and very clever lyrically. And I noticed that right from the get-go, that he had a real talent, with lyrics to reach out to people. But the very first sort of 3 or 4 singles we put out as a band, I pretty much wrote all of them myself,
Yeah.
And I think that he began to realize that, more so because he was singing on stage, that he wanted to sing about something that he'd written that he believed in,
Yeah.
And as a personal thing, I think, for Michael. And, I respected that. That's cool. That's okay. It's good.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not very often that a songwriting partnership comes along. You look at Elton John and Bernie Taupin. What a great partnership. You look at, Vanda and Young in Australia. I mean, it's that chemistry that brings you together. When was that moment when you and Michael just realized that you had that chemistry?
I think first of all, we had written together for a while. But I think we got better. And I think when we originally started doing it, we weren't as focused as we got, later on. We got more and more focused at it. And I think, I'll give you an example. Just one snapshot would be, we had top 40 hits, obviously in Australia, but also in America and other parts of the world, other countries. We'd had top 40 hits. But with the song What You Need, it went into the top 5 in the US charts. And we were competing with people like Bruce Springsteen and Michael Jackson and, the biggest artists of that period. And I remember thinking to myself, when our manager, who was alive at the time, Chris Murphy, called me at home, and he said, well, aren't you excited? Your song is in the top 5 in the United States in the charts. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. And he said, yeah, no, it's gone in there, and, you've got a really huge hit. You should go out and celebrate or do something fun or whatever. And I thought, yeah, I guess so. But I had a really strange feeling, and I put down the phone. And I called Michael, and he said, yeah, Chris just called me, and we've got this huge big hit at the moment in America. And I said, how do you feel about that? And he said, I feel pretty strange about it. I said, yeah, I do too. And what really hit home was, even though we'd had, charting hits overseas and in Australia, had done really well with previous releases and things, what really hit me, and I think it was what Michael was thinking too, is when you get that kind of success, you say to yourself, well, I guess we'll have to go and do it again, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a hard thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Is because suddenly you're faced with the, enormous reality that, okay, well, I guess if that's the biggest, thing we ever did, well, that's the biggest thing we did, and that's great. Yeah. But then you're faced with the enormous reality of, if we're going to try to do it again, how on earth do we do that? So I think that was where the album Kick came from, is because the two of us began to realize that we had to just put everything into the next round of writing that we possibly, like every little ounce of whatever was in us was put into that record, in a creative sense. And, God bless them, the guys in the band, all the guys, my brothers, Tim and John and Kirk and Gary, as well as Michael and myself, we all put 110% of everything we could think of into that particular album. And I think that energy that we when we walked into that recording sessions or those sessions, it was really extraordinary. Yeah.
The pressure, you've had you've had a massive hit. The pressure of as a songwriter of going, okay, we're not going to think about it too much. We're just going to move on to the next project, but it's always in the back of your mind. How do you deal with that sort of pressure as a songwriter?
Well, that's a good point. I try not to think about it. I try to think about, more pragmatic things, a bit like when you learn to walk as a baby. Your main focus is on what you're doing at the time.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're like scrambled eggs or scatterbrain because you don't know what you're doing. I think the way I still approach it is I focus on the task at hand as I'm doing it. And that's pretty much all my focus is. And in fact, there was a period there around that sort of middle period, if you like, of the INXS albums. There was a time when I used to literally, before mobile phones, I used to pull the phone cord out of the wall and just focus on songwriting. Not because I didn't love or care about people or I wasn't interested in them or whatever. I just realized I had to be so focused on what I was doing, and I didn't want any distractions at all, and that helped hugely. And I still do that as Andrew Farriss in my solo career. Not so much pull the phone out of the wall, but when I'm writing, my wife Marlena knows me well, and she just sort of steers clear of what I'm doing when I'm writing, because I have to stay focused so I don't lose the train of thought.
Yes. When you're writing a song, what do you focus on first? Is it the melody, the groove, the lyrics? What's the first thing that comes?
I've worked in every possible direction you can imagine. And I mean, in that sense, in my career with what I'm doing now, I'll work with something that I want to work with because, I like what I'm doing. But then again, when I'm co-writing with somebody, I've learned, and not just Michael, I've learned over the years with girls and guys, when I'm co-writing with them, to listen to what it is they want to do and then spark off that and kind of like, okay, and take that sort of their ideas creatively, take it seriously to where they want to go. That's important.
You worked with Jenny Morris on her Shiver album, and She Has to Be Loved. You co-wrote with her.
Yeah,
I mean, that would have been a very different process than, say, working with Michael.
Yeah, well, it was, and also, in that sense, because, well, Jenny's a good guitar player, it's a great singer, it's a great songwriter, but in that sense, Michael and I were a strange songwriting team, and yet again perfectly balanced, where Michael didn't play musical instruments. His voice was his instrument, and man, what a voice, incredible. But what I'm saying is that, because he didn't play an instrument, I'd be playing the guitar or piano or whatever instrument it was at the time. And he wasn't competitive. Some people, when you're songwriting with them, they could be a better guitar player than you or a better keyboard player, and I'd feel a bit uncomfortable when I'm trying to play something and I can't play the part that they're playing on their instrument. I would feel a bit uncomfortable. But I never felt that with Michael, because we were balanced in that sense where, he wasn't so much judging what I was doing. He was just going, okay, I like that, let's run with that. And that gave me a tremendous amount of freedom, really, as a musician, to go wherever I wanted to go,
Yes. Was there a song that was the quickest song that you've ever written?
Oh, probably Need You Tonight was probably one of the fastest songs that the two of us ever wrote. It was ridiculous. I'd already worked on the demo of the music, and I got off the plane in Hong Kong when Michael was living there, and we decided to record and write in Hong Kong. And so I got off the plane, and he goes, "What do you got? You got anything I can hear that you've been working on?" And I thought, well, I'd play it on guitar, but then I'll just put this cassette, which is back then the technology, I'll put it on and see what he thinks. So I put the demo I had of Need You Tonight on, and he goes, "I love it." He grabs a pad and a pen, and literally right there wrote out the lyric that you would know as Need You Tonight.
Yeah, wow.
Asked the recording engineer to open a microphone up and sang the vocal, and it freaked me out because I was like, that's amazing. Like he hasn't even heard it before, and he's writing this thing. And that all happened probably from the moment I arrived, probably within half an hour or maybe, it was crazy, but there was many things like that happened in those days. It's sort of like it was just meant to be, if you want to be a bit fatalistic, certain things they were meant to happen, I'd like to say, oh yeah, we were geniuses. Oh yeah, we were really clever. And I think some of it was sort of designed and we worked bloody hard. And some of it was just luck. We just happened to do things that people liked, and as a band too, for INXS, I feel we were really, really lucky to have each other in that sense. We supported each other. We tried to make each other laugh most of the time instead of being too serious about it. I was probably a bit more like Eeyore in some ways than some of the other guys, mainly because I found we toured so much, like relentlessly around the world. We worked in over 50 countries at one point, and I probably just became a bit frustrated with the touring thing, because my main thing is creativity. I want to be creative.
Yeah.
You know, and touring is not necessarily conducive to being creative. You know, it's sort of you're very much, you know, performance focused on what you're doing, you know. And so I was a little frustrated later on with all of that. But, you know, I'd take my hat off to the other guys in INXS. They would put up with me, you know, whinging or complaining when I wasn't really whinging or complaining about the gigs. It's great to have gigs and have such an incredibly supportive audience. It's awesome. Yeah. But that's not really what I meant. What I meant was creatively, it could be quite stifling when you're constantly touring. You know?
Is it hard to write on the road?
I find musically it can be difficult. Yeah, really hard on the road. Whereas lyrically, ironically, it's a bit easier because you're observing situations and you're able to, you know, process situations, people, you know, cultures, you know, as life would throw it at you, and you can observe. And therefore, you know, the writing of the lyric, I found was actually quite good being on tour, but musically I found it really hard to write on the road. Yeah.
Now, I've spoken with you about this before, but it's a big difference going from rock music through to you know, country music. However, you've pointed out that there were many times where, you know, the music you wrote was almost bordering country, and in fact, you guys appeared on Countdown singing "Need You Tonight," dressed in your Akubras and you know, your coats, your dry as a bones. Has country always been a part of who you are as Andrew Farriss?
Yeah, I think it has been. Well, you know, the connection for me with country and folk music really too is that it's, you know, you need to have the song. You have to have the song to sing in the first place.
Yeah.
How you stylize the song, it could be EDM, it could be heavy metal, it could be funk, it can be country. So that's up to you to decide what, you know, what you can or are capable of doing. You know, and that's why I steered myself more and more, especially after Michael passed away. More and more I began to steer myself. What do I want to do? What am I trying to do here? Yeah. You know, and then I began to realize as I went along that I do love writing songs.
Yeah,
and I can write by myself. I can write with other people. Both are good. You know, I don't want to write all the time with other people. That's a common thing. People go, "Oh, you know, who are you writing with in Nashville at the moment?" I say, "Me." You know, you know.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have to be in Nashville to write a song.
No.
You know, I can write it anywhere. It's just that there happens to be in Nashville a massive community of incredibly talented people, a talent pool of people who all live, most of them, a lot of them live in Nashville. Yeah. And that makes it extraordinary. We don't really have a community quite like that in Australia. We have Tamworth, which is a great expose, if you like, or platform for people to be heard in the country music genre. But people don't all live in Tamworth, and there's no really big music industry in Tamworth. It visits Tamworth, you know.
Do you find though that people living in Nashville, that it becomes very insular to a certain degree?
Sure. I mean, anywhere where you have a like-minded community of people who are all living in the same, and, you know, breathing and living in the same area, sure, you know, it can all get a bit mushy, I suppose is the word, or you know, complex in that sense. But then again, you know, I think that community of people is not a new community. It's been around for a long, long time, you know, and way back when, you know. And I think that's another thing with country music that I find really interesting, is that people have realized just recently, they were talking to me about the INXS recording, Immediate Sensation. Yes. And someone said, "Is that a banjo that's being played during the song?" I said, "Yeah, I'm playing it on a keyboard as this keyboard sample," you know.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes all through the song. And it's because, you know, I don't say just because an instrument is often used by a particular genre of music that you can only use that within that genre of music. You can do whatever you want, you know. And once you realize that, it's quite liberating because, you know, creatively you can do whatever you want, you know.
Yeah.
And it's also the kind of instrument, like for example, say Stevie Wonder, you know, when he was using a clavinet in the song Superstition, I can't imagine a better sound than that for that song, you know. And yet, I don't know, a clavinet in many ways, it sounds a little bit like a harpsichord from the Baroque era of the, you know, of classical music, doesn't it?
It's like bringing a harmonica into a song, you know, and you go, well, that's folk music. Well, Stevie Wonder proved that it's not folk music. It's something that can be used as an instrument to enhance the music.
Yeah, that's right. Well, folk music too. The other intriguing thing with country music in its original form was a lot of it was really brought to places like Australia, United States, Canada, New Zealand, you know, wherever in Europe and from Europe, you know, by traditional folk musicians would bring these instruments. But I think the really, if I can put it, the really cool part was when it got blended with more blues style musics and soul and gospel, you know, out of the United States, is when country suddenly developed this whole other lean. It wasn't just folk music, it was something else entirely, you know. And if you listen to, you know, some of the early Australian country artists and massive legends like Slim Dusty, you know, some didn't really put much blues into the music because it's Australiana, you know.
Yeah.
You know, which is not, I'm not taking anything away from Slim. I met Slim, he was brilliant, you know, brilliant guy, and what a career, wow. And I love his songs and the whole thing, and Joy, you know, as well, Joy McKean. But it's not that. What I'm saying is that it's the American part of it, that you've got a fusion of different musics all colliding, you know, that make up country music. You know, and it's interesting too that someone say like Bob Dylan, you know, was, you know, he and Johnny Cash got on quite well, and he would go on Johnny Cash's television show, you know, and so did people like Ray Charles, you know, Ray Charles, who was, you know, the genius, you know, ended up having quite a career in country music, and you wouldn't have thought on the face of it that was very obvious at first, you know.
There's been a lot of crossover, though, with country and rock.
That's right.
Not just recently, but in the past as well. But if we look at more recently, a lot of bands that were, you know, a rap artist that suddenly says, I'm now a country artist, you know, or an R&B artist that says, I'm now a country artist. It's that crossing of borders that really shows that music is music, regardless of what it is.
Sure. I mean, when I was a little kid growing up in Perth, my mum, Jill, gave me a transistor radio, and I used to put it under my pillow at night. And in those days, I don't think there was even an FM radio station way back then. And this would be in the 60s, I think. But on the radio stations of the day, and like 6PR or whatever it was, 6 p.m., you know, you'd hear all kinds of music on the radio.
Yes.
So as a kid, I thought, well, every radio station's like that all around the world. They play all kinds of music. And it wasn't until later on I realized how wrong that was, and that music's become very, you know, oh, we only play this kind of music, or we only play that kind of music, or whatever. But to hear every kind of music on a radio station is really the way to go. They should be playing every kind of music on the radio. You know?
Did you have a favorite song?
Oh, well, I mean, I always liked, don't ask me why, songs like North to Alaska, and I don't really know why. And I liked the Beatles and the Monkees and the Rolling Stones and all that era as well. I liked, you know, some of Slim Dusty's songs as well. You know, there's lots of different, and I liked instrumentals as well. There were, no one was telling a story, or that, you know, it's like just shut up and let the music play, you know what I mean? Like, and just have an instrumental, that seems to have gone out the window. Commercial radio has to have someone singing, about something, so for whatever reason,
Now you've obviously you're building this country career. You had the opportunity to step onto the Grand Ole Opry stage. Now you played. Let's just frame this right. You've played some of the biggest stadiums in the world. You've stepped onto the Grand Ole Opry stage. How can you describe that?
Well, I'm very fortunate to be able to do that for a start. I don't take that lightly, and it's not so much the career moment, which I guess it really was and is. It's not that so much as I didn't mean to. When I started working in this particular genre, I really started quite a long time ago now, about 13, 14 years. I started connecting with people in Nashville and co-writing with people. I didn't try to think I'd have an Andrew Farriss country music career. I didn't actually start off doing that. I was just songwriting with people. And then I realized I had all these demos from an older period of my life, of various decades. It could have been the 80s, 90s, 2000s, or whatever. And they all sounded like a big mishmash and a jumble up of song ideas. And then I thought, well, that's kind of a mess, Andrew Farriss, the mess, and I thought, well, that's not, I can do better than that. So I started re-recording a lot of my older demos, including the song Come Midnight. And then I realized when I'd recorded that song, I thought, well, I'll need someone, and I said to the recording engineer or whatever, I need someone who can sing really well. And when I find them, I'll put them on the song. And the engineer looked at me and said, what's wrong with your voice? I said, well, it's me. And he said, well, so what? Just sing it, And I think that support that I got from people, they didn't care less whether I was from INXS or not. They just said, well, you sound okay, so just sing it. Don't worry about it, And that's where my journey really started, was I going, oh, okay,
I can sing.
and I don't have to have a hang up about my past career or life or whatever, and just sing and keep writing and keep doing what I'm doing. And that's what I've done. I've just sort of fairly naturally, just fallen into it. I don't expect that everybody will immediately like what I've done or what I'm doing. And in fact, what I'm doing is not exactly like everybody else either. I don't sit around constructing and deconstructing other people's songs to work out what made them hits or even the subject matter. I can't help it. It sounds a bit arrogant. I need to be me. I need to be myself. And I need to be true to who I am and what I believe in. And lyrically, I write songs that I feel comfortable singing. I don't really care what everyone else is singing about. That's not that's not my problem.
Yeah. And but I guess before we get into the new song too, because I want to find out about your writing Mending Fences in Nashville. There's always things that we do where we look back and we go, well, okay, that was different. That was unusual. Don't quite understand how that happened. One of them, I imagine, would be INXS becoming a Sega game.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. And if we're wandering and tiptoeing around the technology conversation, I've got a fairly simple thing I say to people, and that is, you can't eat a smartphone.
No.
Technology is always changing. It was different 100 years ago, and it'll be different in 100 years' time. And you and I, will be gone, and they'll be using some other kind of technology. But in between, you need good food and you need clean water. Everything else is kind of like just a distraction and a way for corporations to make money out of you. That's what it's really all about. I don't see anyone from any technology company going, we're trying to make the world a better place by doing this or doing that with technology. I don't see that. There doesn't seem to be any moral barometer for any of it. It's just that if you don't have the latest device or the latest little gadget or the latest thing, then you're not okay and you're not hip and you're not cool and you're an old dude. I don't subscribe to all that.
No,
I just think not all technology is good for you.
No.
Right.
No. And that brings us to life on the land. I mean, you've really, one thing I love about you and your career is that you're not just putting on the country hat and saying, yeah, well, I'm gonna do country songs now. You're actually living on the land. You're living on a property in Australia. You're embracing that country life completely.
Yeah, that's right. You know, Shane, that's another thing. I didn't originally, when I bought into the farm that I've had now for over 30 years, I didn't have delusions of grandeur with suddenly, you know, becoming a farmer. In fact, it's ironic that a lot of people probably don't believe this. I didn't deliberately buy my farm because it was near Tamworth, you know, in the New South Wales, being a country music capital.
Yeah.
I bought it because it was the best farm I saw, looking as far south in Yackandandah and Victoria, all out through the wheat and flat country out west in New South Wales. I looked out there too. And I think what it was is I was a bit over living out of a suitcase all the time, you know, in foreign countries. I just sort of thought there's got to be more to life than this. And what do? You know, if you live in the city, you know, you're lucky, well, these days to be even able to afford a house, you know, which is terrible, you know, or even rent somewhere. It's crazy. And very irresponsible of all previous governments, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think in the era we're living in, I have a lot of empathy for people, you know, but I also think that if we were all encouraged to go, you know, Australians were encouraged to go inland more and more, and there are incentives for Australians to move inland away from our big cities. Our cities are beautiful. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if there was actually incentives and motivations for companies or for people to move inland in Australia, we'd be a much better country for it. You know, yeah.
It's one of the reasons why I moved to Tasmania. Between you and me, it's like we were sick and tired of the Gold Coast lifestyle, and we just said we've just got to move somewhere where it's quieter and a bit more in control of our lives. You know.
Yeah, well, and the bush has an effect on you if you live in the bush too. You know, I mean, I know the difference from living in our amazing cities and incredible suburbs in Australia to the difference of living out in the bush. I know what the difference is, and I've observed the communities too out in these areas and the struggles and occasional wins and gains that they make out in the bush. A lot of it goes unnoticed. You know, people live quiet lives out in the bush mostly. You know, they're not sort of, I mean, look at me, you know, they're not attention-seeking individuals, but, you know, most of them are very sort of humble, normal people who work bloody hard.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings me to Mending Fences. The song really focuses on farmers and the resilience that they really have to go through as farmers. I mean, is that something, sort of speaking from personal experience now?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think a lot of people think food comes from a supermarket.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, it doesn't. No, yeah, that's right. No, it sure doesn't. It actually starts, you know, literally from the dirt. You know, starts from the dirt and starts with hard work. It starts with people having to get up and do things that other people would simply say, that's too hard. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I don't want to get cut on a barbed wire fence. I don't want to do all this stuff. It's all too hard, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Not easy. Yeah.
But well, so that's where the technology bit comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But you can't eat a smartphone.
No, you can't.
No,
you can't. You saw your well, we're going to play Mending Fences. I'll lead into that just with a little bit of a segue. But I want to talk about your new album. It's coming out soon. It is called The Prospector. What does The Prospector represent to you? A very unusual name for the...
Yeah. Well, Shane, the Prospector album title came about because I began to, focus on what songs that I wanted to release on the Prospector. And then I realized I had a stream of, thought lyrically on some of these songs that are very much about observing and looking for things. And I don't mean silver or gold, with an old prospector with a pick over his shoulder and a mule and a gold pan. I'm not talking about that.
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Yeah. No, what I'm really getting at is that, you're observing things, whether it's trouble in the world or people around you, how people's behavior is and what's happening in the world, And I don't necessarily mean, I'm not talking straight politics, because the world's always changing. Politics are always changing in the world, 1 minute this is fashionable, the next minute it's not, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know about all that. I don't know what the answer is to all that. All I know is that it's a lot of the time, what we're observing is how we, being an individual, reacts to things, and that's where I thought The Prospector was an interesting title. That's all.
And it's very relevant especially for what's going on in the world right now too.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of trouble in the world. Always has been, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just in closing, I think you've had the amazing success of INXS. You've had the opportunity to work with artists like Yothu Yindi, sharing a stage with Keith Urban. Is there a moment that, if you look back at the life of Andrew Farriss, is there one moment that you could go, that's the most amazing part of my life?
Well, I've had a lot of them, from the birth of my 3 children, to my beautiful wife, Marlena. And there's things that have got nothing to do with show business or music, but they're very much part of my life. I miss my parents terribly.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, I could really use their advice on things that I was too arrogant and stupid to ask when they were alive. But I would say, if you're talking about show business and music career and all the rest of it, probably the closest I can think of to a Yoda moment, like from Star Wars, right, was, I think we had just recorded and released the album Kick, and I think it was one of the first ARIA Awards, I think, or maybe it was the first, and George Martin, the Beatles producer, was there, and Elton John, I think, had said, look, whatever you do, don't televise this in the future, because then you can't say fuck anymore. Everyone laughed in the room, right? But George Martin, we were talking to him, the band, and I mean, who isn't a fan of that man?
Yeah.
Anyway, and he was saying, congratulations on the success of your album Kick, and my son Giles Martin, is a massive fan of you guys, and well, shucks, gee, thanks, George, and we're talking to him, and I think somehow, I'm trying to think of how it unfolded. He was, I said, well, yeah, I mean, we're so excited with the success of Kick and our recent albums we've had out in the world. Wait till you hear what we do next. And I remember saying to him, and I'll never forget his Yoda moment when he said to me, what's wrong with what you've already done?
Yeah.
Most people, they keep wanting something better, bigger, more dynamic, more sensory, more whatever it is, right? But his Yoda moment to me was just brilliant. I mean, I should actually frame that and hang it on the wall, I think, in my house, What's wrong with what you've already done, But if you're wondering what I'm doing after, all these years, Shane, I've kept doing what I always did since I was a kid. I'm writing songs. That's what I do.
That's what it all comes back to. Yeah.
That's right.
That's what it all comes back to.
That's where I started, and there wasn't any money in it. I just did it because I liked it.
Yeah. Yep. And now you're singing those songs too, which is even better.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm lucky. And you know what? The other thing I'm really fortunate about to have in this, so country rock thing I'm in now, folk thing, whatever it is I have a platform to release my music, which a lot of people may not have. And I'm really grateful for that too.
Yeah. That is fantastic. When does The Prospector come out? Any date?
Yeah, round about June of this year. Yeah.
Excellent.
Probably late June, but I have a target now. So instead of procrastinating about it, I actually have a target.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, make sure you listen to Mending Fences, and if you want to hook up with Andrew's newsletter and get the information as it sort of unfolds with the new album, then head over to andrewfarriss.com. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today, and I have to say, from a music perspective, there's not many guys that have gone through what you've gone through and stayed so grounded and so authentically you.
Thanks, Shane.
Yeah.
And good to talk to you again, mate. And
appreciate
you
it.
take care out there in the wild world we live in.
Yes,
so anyway,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, see you later.
See ya.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
Hit plus or follow to subscribe to the podcast, and head over to Facebook at The Long Way to the Top Podcast and give us a like. Keep on rocking, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Long Way to the Top.